New earthquakes have shaken the Caribbean twice in the past 2 weeks, and scientists are watching this stretch of ocean more closely than they have in years. Let's get straight into it, because there's a lot of ground to cover between the seismic activity and everything still unfolding from the disaster that came before it. On July 18th, a magnitude 5.1 earthquake struck south of Grand Cayman, shallow enough that a lot of residents there actually felt it clearly. Then on July 20th, a magnitude 5.4 quake hit the Caribbean Sea near Tobago at around 5:45 in the morning local time, waking people across the island. No injuries, no structural damage reported from either event, and I want to be straightforward with you. I'm watching this corridor closely. If anything else comes through, I'll be back the moment it happens. Let's start with the tsunami question directly, because I know that's the first thing on a lot of minds anytime the words earthquake and Caribbean show up together right now, especially after what this region just went through. Neither of these two quakes generated any tsunami threat, and the reasons are different for each one, which is worth walking through carefully. The Tobago event struck at a depth of about 73 kilometers, which puts it in what seismologists call the intermediate range, anywhere from 70 to 300 kilometers down. At that depth, the rupture is simply too far below the seafloor to shove a meaningful column of water upward, all at once. Shallow earthquakes are the ones that do the real damage to the ocean floor directly above them, and they're responsible for the vast majority of tsunami-generating events worldwide. The Cayman quake, by contrast, was shallow, but it was also consistent with strike-slip motion, meaning two blocks of crust grinding sideways past each other along a fault line rather than one side lurching sharply up or down. Tsunamis form when the seafloor itself gets displaced vertically. A sideways slip simply doesn't move water the same way, so an event like that one is far less likely to generate any meaningful wave activity, even at shallow depth. Depth explained one, geometry explained the other, and together that's genuinely good news worth passing along. It's worth explaining briefly why this stretch of ocean produces earthquakes like these so often, because it isn't random at all. The Cayman Islands sit right along the northern edge of the Cayman Trough, a long, narrow underwater basin marking the boundary between the North American and Caribbean. Tectonic plates. Rather than one plate diving directly beneath the other the way it does in a classic subduction zone, these two plates mostly grind past each other sideways along this boundary, which is exactly the setup that produces strike-slip earthquakes rather than the vertical seafloor heaving that tends to generate large tsunamis. That doesn't mean this particular stretch of crust is incapable of something considerably larger. Back in January of 2020, the same general area produced a magnitude 7.7 earthquake, one of the largest ever recorded in the Cayman Trough. And even that event, despite its size, only generated a modest tsunami wave under 2 feet at Georgetown, precisely because the underlying fault motion stayed predominantly sideways rather than vertical. So while this month's events were comparatively minor, this region has demonstrated the geological capacity for something much bigger, which is exactly why continuous monitoring here matters, not just after something happens, but in the quiet stretches in between. Tobago sits along its own distinct piece of the boundary, where the Caribbean plate meets the South American plate along a system of transform faults running roughly east to west across the southern edge of the Caribbean. This is a genuinely active corridor in its own right, and it has produced significant historical earthquakes before, including a magnitude 7.7 event near Caracas back in 1900, and a magnitude 6.6 quake in almost the same stretch of coastline back in 1967, which killed around 240 people and collapsed multiple high-rise buildings in Caracas at the time. None of that history means another large earthquake is imminent here, but it does mean this particular stretch of plate boundary has already proven it's capable of producing something considerably stronger than a magnitude 5.4, which is part of why I keep it on my regular watch list, and it's also exactly the same broader boundary zone responsible for the disaster this region is still recovering from right now. Because we can't talk about seismic activity in the southern Caribbean this week without talking about what happened on June 24th. That evening, northern Venezuela was struck by an extraordinarily rare earthquake doublet. A magnitude 7.2 event followed just 39 seconds later by a magnitude 7.5 event, with epicenters only a few kilometers apart near the town of Yumare in Yaracuy State, roughly 160 kilometers west of Caracas. Seismologists confirmed this was the strongest earthquake sequence to hit Venezuela since 1900. A tsunami alert went out within minutes, reaching as far as Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, though it was canceled a short time later once forecast water levels came back below a foot. On the ground, the damage was devastating. More than 250 structures collapsed across northwestern Venezuela, including hospitals, the Venezuelan Red Cross headquarters, and the French embassy. The confirmed death toll climbed into the thousands in the days that followed, with more than 11,000 people injured, and Venezuela has recorded well over 100 aftershocks since the main shock. The fault system behind it, the Bocono-San Sebastian El Pilar system, is the same general transform boundary zone that runs east, through the Los Bajos and Warm Springs faults toward Trinidad, which is exactly why seismologists are watching Trinidad and Tobago so closely right now. It isn't that the July 20th quake near Tobago was caused directly by the Venezuela event a month earlier. Distant earthquakes can still nudge stress along a shared fault system, and researchers are actively studying whether there's any meaningful connection between the two. But that work takes time and careful analysis, and nobody serious is jumping to conclusions yet. What scientists are watching is simpler and more immediate than that. Whether this recent stretch of moderate activity across the southern Caribbean represents normal background seismicity along an already tense boundary, or something building toward another significant release of stress somewhere along that same line. For context on how I approach all of this, my background covers meteorology, but I've also spent years studying seismology specifically, so I can bring you a more complete regional picture rather than just isolated headlines every time the ground moves somewhere in this hemisphere. And there was a smaller reminder just 2 days ago that this broader region stays active even away from the Cayman Trough and the southern Caribbean boundary. A magnitude 4.5 earthquake struck near the Chiapas coast in southern Mexico on July 29th, close to the Guatemala border, a stretch of the map that sits above its own subduction zone where the Cocos Plate dives beneath the Caribbean and North American plates. Nothing damaging reported from that one, but it's a good reminder that this hemisphere runs on several separate fault systems working independently of each other, not one single connected story. It's also worth talking about how scientists actually catch these events in real time, because the system behind that 5-minute-old alert you might have seen on your phone is more impressive than most people realize. Agencies like the U.S. Geological Survey, the European Mediterranean Seismological Center, and the University of the West Indies Seismic Research Center all run networks of seismometers scattered across the region, and those instruments detect the arrival of seismic waves within seconds of a rupture starting. The first wave to arrive, called a P wave, travels faster than the more damaging S waves and surface waves that follow it, which is the entire basis of early warning. By measuring how quickly that first wave hits multiple stations and comparing the timing between them, seismologists can calculate a location, depth, and preliminary magnitude often before the shaking itself has even finished at the epicenter. That's also how tsunami warning centers make their initial call so quickly. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center and similar regional centers combine that fast seismic read with a network of deep ocean pressure sensors called DART buoys, which sit on the seafloor and can detect the pressure change caused by a tsunami wave passing overhead long before it reaches any coastline. When the Venezuela doublet hit next to the coast, agencies had a tsunami alert out within minutes, precisely because of this combination of fast seismic detection and prepositioned ocean instrumentation, and they were able to cancel it just as quickly once the buoy data came back showing minimal wave height. That speed matters enormously in a region where some vulnerable coastlines sit only minutes away from a nearby fault. I also want to talk through what scientists actually do with a cluster like this, because I get asked constantly whether a run of moderate earthquakes means a bigger one is coming. The honest answer is that earthquakes don't work on a predictable countdown. What seismologists watch for instead is pattern. Is a smaller quake sitting close in time and location to a larger one, an aftershock trailing behind it, or a foreshock, a warning sign that something bigger could still be building in that same spot? Researchers look at the timing between events, the depth, the type of fault motion, and how the stress transferred from one rupture to the next along a shared boundary. None of that adds up to a prediction. Nobody can tell you an earthquake is coming on a specific day. What it does add up to is a clearer sense of which stretches of plate boundary are currently under the most stress, and that's exactly the kind of information that shapes where monitoring resources, early warning systems, and public preparedness messaging get concentrated. If you live anywhere along this corridor, from the Cayman Islands down through Trinidad and Tobago, it's worth taking a moment now while things are calm to think through the basics. Know where you go inside your home during shaking, away from windows and heavy furniture that could tip. If you're near the coast and ever feel strong, prolonged shaking, especially anything that keeps you off your feet for 10 seconds or more, that itself is nature's tsunami warning, and moving to higher ground immediately is always the right call, regardless of whether an official advisory has been issued yet. Building codes across much of this region were designed primarily around hurricane resistance rather than seismic resistance, so older structures in particular can be more vulnerable to shaking damage than people sometimes assume. If you do feel a notable quake, a quick check afterward for new cracks in concrete walls or foundations, or doors and windows that suddenly stick, can help you spot structural stress worth having a professional look at. It's also worth having a basic emergency kit ready, regardless of what the seismic activity looks like this week. Water, a flashlight, a portable charger, copies of important documents, and a few days of any medication you rely on. None of that is meant to cause alarm. It's the same kind of preparation coastal communities in this region already do every year ahead of hurricane season, just applied to a hazard that doesn't come with days of advance warning the way a tropical system does. Now, let's shift over to the tropical weather side of things, because there's a fair amount worth tracking there too. And it ties into the same broader picture of a region that's had a genuinely difficult stretch lately. As of the latest outlook from the National Hurricane Center, tropical cyclone formation isn't expected anywhere across the Atlantic, the Caribbean Sea, or the Gulf, over the next 7 days. That's the headline, and for a region still recovering from a major disaster and monitoring elevated seismic activity on top of it, that's genuinely welcome news. We've still got tropical waves on the move, though. One is sitting out in the eastern Atlantic, moving westward and producing scattered to isolated strong convection well offshore. A second is further west in the central Atlantic, also tracking westward, with its own pocket of showers and storms embedded in it. A third is already in the western Caribbean, producing scattered moderate to isolated strong convection as it drifts west, and that's the one worth watching most closely, simply because it's already close enough to affect land. This whole season has been shaped by a strong El Niño pattern. And it's worth explaining why that matters, because it's the single biggest factor driving how quiet the tropics have stayed. El Niño tends to push wind shear higher across the Caribbean Sea in the broader Atlantic main development region, the stretch running from West Africa to Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, where most named storms in this basin actually form. Strong upper-level winds shred developing systems apart before they can organize, which is exactly the kind of hostile environment we've been sitting in for weeks now. Seasonal forecasters have been steadily lowering their outlooks through the summer as a result, now anticipating a well below normal Atlantic season overall, with a correspondingly lower chance of major hurricane landfalls across the Caribbean and the continental United States. That's the good news, buried in an otherwise heavy couple of weeks for this region. The bad news is the same pattern that's suppressing tropical development is also part of why parts of the Caribbean, especially Haiti and sections of the Dominican Republic, have been running unusually dry. And drought stress on top of a major regional earthquake response is a genuinely difficult combination for emergency planners to manage at the same time. Walking through where the rain chances actually sit region by region right now, the western Caribbean wave should bring scattered showers into parts of Honduras, Belize, and the Yucatan over the next couple of days, as it continues drifting west, with afternoon convection building over Guatemala and El Salvador as well. Jamaica and the Cayman Islands are looking at mostly isolated shower activity rather than anything widespread, similar to what we've seen off and on for the past week. The Central and Eastern Caribbean, including Trinidad and Tobago, Grenada, and the Windward Islands, should see periods of scattered showers tied to the trade wind flow and the tail end of that central Atlantic wave as it eventually works its way through, though nothing organized enough to raise concern. Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands are sitting in a quieter stretch for now, with just isolated afternoon showers expected. The northeastern Caribbean, including Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, and the surrounding islands, should stay mostly dry through the next several days outside of typical trade wind showers. Florida and the Bahamas remain under a fairly typical summer pattern, with afternoon storms building inland each day, and slightly better rain chances near frontal boundaries dropping down from the north over the coming weekend. A bit further out on the map, Central America is worth a mention too. Costa Rica and Panama typically run their own separate rainy season pattern this time of year, regardless of what the Atlantic tropics are doing, and that continues, with daily afternoon downpours expected to keep building through the coming week independent of any of the three waves we're tracking. Northern Colombia and Venezuela's Caribbean coastline, still very much in earthquake recovery mode, are looking at a mix of scattered showers and generally hot, humid conditions. And for what it's worth, meteorologists and disaster response teams in that region have specifically flagged that heavy rainfall on top of already weakened earthquake damage. Structures and loosened hillsides is one of their bigger secondary concerns right now, since saturated ground and cracked foundations are a much worse combination than either hazard on its own. That's part of why local authorities have been watching the forecast there just as closely as they've been watching aftershock activity. Up toward the northern edge of the basin, Bermuda and the western Atlantic remain generally quiet for now, with only the usual periodic frontal passages moving through from the north, bringing brief spells of showers and gusty wind before clearing back out. And out in the eastern Atlantic, that first tropical wave near the African coast will bear. Watching simply because it's still early enough in its life cycle that models don't have a strong handle yet on whether it holds together as it crosses into more favorable or unfavorable conditions over the next week to 10 days. Right now, nothing about its current structure suggests organization is likely, but it's exactly the kind of system worth flagging early rather than waiting until it's closer to land to start talking about it. Haiti and parts of the southern Dominican Republic remain the areas I'm watching most closely on the dry side of this pattern. Water shortages there have been a persistent concern through the summer, and with El Niño continuing to suppress the kind of organized tropical moisture that normally brings meaningful rainfall totals to this part of the Caribbean, meaningful relief doesn't look imminent over the next week. If that Western Caribbean wave holds together longer than current guidance suggests and tracks further north than expected, there's some chance it could eventually push a better rain chance into Hispaniola. But that's not the most likely outcome right now, and I'll keep you updated if that changes. Stepping back to look at the bigger picture, it's genuinely been an active stretch across this hemisphere, and I think it's worth naming that plainly, rather than letting each individual event pass by in isolation. A catastrophic earthquake doublet in Venezuela less than 5 weeks ago. A notable earthquake near the Cayman Islands, another one near Tobago along the same broader plate system, still absorbing stress from that same event. A quieter reminder out of southern Mexico that the subduction zone along the Pacific side of Central America never really goes silent either. None of these events are mechanically connected to each other in any direct sense, different fault systems, different plates, different depths, but taken together. It's clearly been an unusually busy few weeks for seismic activity across this part of the world, and that's exactly why continuous, careful monitoring matters right now more than it has in years. If you felt any shaking recently, whether that was the Cayman quake, the Tobago quake, an aftershock out of Venezuela, or anything else, drop it in the comments and let me know your location. That genuinely helps, both for letting others nearby know they're not imagining things, and for giving me an early, real-time sense of how strong and how widely felt an event actually was, while I'm still working behind the scenes to pull the official numbers together. Same goes for the weather side of things. If you're seeing rain build up where you are, or if conditions stay stubbornly dry, let me know that too, since local reports genuinely help fill in the gaps between official station data. Here's where things stand heading into the next several days. No tropical development expected across the basin over the next week, which is good news layered on top of a difficult stretch for this region. 3 tropical waves on the move, with the Western Caribbean wave the one most likely to bring meaningful rain to land in the near term. Elevated, but not alarming seismic activity. Continuing along both the Cayman Trough and the Southern Caribbean boundary, with scientists watching closely for any sign of a meaningful pattern rather than isolated background noise. And a recovery effort in Venezuela that's very much still ongoing, with our thoughts remaining with the communities working through the aftermath of the strongest earthquake the country has seen in over a century. I'll be checking the comments throughout the day, so let me know what you're seeing and feeling in your area, whether that's shaking, rainfall, or just how the sky looks where you are right now. Regional and national geological agencies, from Jamaica to Trinidad, continue coordinating closely on this, sharing data in near real time rather than working in isolation. And that kind of cooperation across borders is exactly what makes a regional picture like this possible in the first place, rather than a scattered collection of separate national headlines. I'll be back with the next update the moment there's something new to share.